right, let's unpack this further now, and I'm joined by Newsroom Africa's Politics Editor Sbu Ngalwa, and we're also hoping to be joined by News 24's Political Editor Kanita Hunter, and we also have Professor Mcebisi Ndletyana. He is with the University of Johannesburg. He's there. And let me tell you that a little later, we're going to be joined, hopefully, by the spokesperson of the African National Congress, Xoli Mngambi. He's indicated his availability at around 30 towards the 22 hour. So let's begin this conversation then, and I'll start here in studio. Sbu, I had a conversation with a senior member of the ANC just before coming to air, and says to me that the only item that's going to be on the agenda will be the step-aside issue, and that the reason matters took a turn for the worst overnight was that the Secretary-General simply refused to step aside. What are you hearing from your end?
That's correct, Xoli. In fact, it's important to also point out that the NEC meeting, which had to adjourn last night, albeit abruptly, around midnight, will now reconvene at around 5 p.m. This afternoon. And as you are saying, the only agenda on the item on the agenda is that issue of the step aside, because as you would know, we had already prepared to have the closing address of the president. This had been shared, we're waiting for the link, and then lo and behold, around 9:30 to 10 o'clock, and then suddenly we hear that it has been postponed. At that time, the messages start flooding in, as you hear that there's a lot of contestation around the stepping aside issue of the Secretary General. But I think what this points to, in fact, perhaps just to take the viewers back just to understand what the issue was.
Yeah.
The Integrity Commission of the ANC had already recommended as far back as December that the Secretary General, Ace Magashule, should step aside. And at yesterday's, at the weekend's meeting, the very same Integrity Commission was to present its reports, not just on Ace Magashule, but on other members. But at the same time, the NEC was meant to finally put into action the guidelines on the step-aside rule.
Yeah.
And the meeting had agreed on these things. So, so the issue then was around the statement as to what are the timelines to Ace Magashule stepping aside. Is it 7 days? Is it 2 weeks? And what time will it take to implement other NEC, other recommendations of the Integrity Commission? But I think the breakdown of the meeting, although the ANC denies it, the breakdown of the meeting, more than anything, it actually shows us that the two men cannot work together. I think the reality is that Cyril Ramaphosa and Ace Magashule, their relationship, I do not believe that it can be salvaged, in that you cannot be a president and not have your Secretary General. I know that some people always talk about how weak Cyril Ramaphosa is as a leader. I think also that weakness, or that perception of him being weak, has to do with the fact that he is not leading a united party, but also more than anything, he doesn't have his SG.
Yeah.
Look at Jacob Zuma.
And yet the president continues to preach unity. We're going to come back to unity in a bit. Professor Ndletyana, let's come to you. We know the position of the Secretary General, what that position has been, and that is that we, South Africans, are told by him that the branches of the ANC can only be the ones that recall the Secretary General of the ANC. I had the pleasure of talking to the Secretary of COSATU just before coming to air, Professor, and he is happy for me to share this with the public, that he says in the recent history where we've had two presidents recalled before their term of office ended, branches of the ANC were never consulted. So why should they be consulted when it comes to the Secretary General of the ANC?
Well, actually, branches already spoke, way back in 2017 to say that if you are charged of corruption, you must step down. So what the party is doing now is to carry through that resolution of conference, which is the highest decision-making structure of the ANC. So anyone who says anything differently from that really is simply fabricating stuff. It's a whole lot of nonsense. Branches have spoken. There is no need to consult them anymore. You simply need to implement what they have said. Yeah.
What should South Africans, Professor, make of the ANC being the leader of society, which is what they preach to us every day? What must South Africans take now from this moment that seizes the ANC?
I think it was a very good confrontation. It's something that had to happen. And the ANC cannot preach unity when in fact it has people amongst its ranks who don't share. So you need to make sure that when you speak with one voice. And obviously those who don't agree do so because they stand a lot to lose. And these are influential leaders such as Mcebisi, whose voice is very prominent in society. So you need to make sure that you toe the line. And so Ace, as I said, stands a lot to lose. So he was always going to oppose whatever measures the ANC seek to do. I am glad, though, that confrontation happened. And the fact that these guidelines were adopted by the NEC a long time ago tells you that the majority of members in the NEC are behind the president. So what they need to do now is to clean house. This is not a faction. When I was talking to Sbu on Friday and saying when we call these folks a faction, we are giving them a modicum of respect. They are not a faction. These are, they are akin to bandits. This is banditry more than factionalism. People who steal and they threaten violence and, these are your latter day Savimbi types, as Joanna Chitanza was saying. So for a party like the ANC, that has a very honorable history with leaders like Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela, to have people like this is a scandal. The ANC will not lose anything by getting rid of these folks. In fact, it will strengthen itself, live up to this idea that they are moral leaders of society. There's nothing clean about these folks that they are dealing with.
Professor, I'm afraid Carl Niehaus is not going to be happy with you calling him a bandit. But nonetheless, you didn't mention names. I'm merely saying that simply out of jest. Let's take a short breather. When we return, we're going to be joined by Juanita Hunter. Their publication, they are running with the story that the ANC Secretary General, and there's Juanita on the screen right now, the Secretary General of the ANC refused to step aside when asked to do so, hence the meeting descending into chaos. So, Juanita Hunter is going to share more details with us in a moment. This is Newsfeed, the AM edition.